The woman no one wanted. Eleanor Hayes stood on that frozen platform with 7 children clinging to her skirts, watching the 47th man walk away. Fat, undesirable, burden. The words cut deeper than the January wind screaming across Wyoming territory. The auction master's gavel was poised to fall, ready to split her family across the frontier like firewood. Officials waited with papers that would tear her children from her arms, one by one, sending them to orphanages and work farms. She had 30 seconds to become someone's wife, or lose everything. Then a mountain appeared, a man the town had forgotten, and he spoke her name. Welcome to this story of courage, second chances, and the family we choose. If this tale moves you, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Eleanor's journey travels. Now, let's begin. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, hungry and mean, tearing at the canvas awning stretched over the makeshift platform in Covenant Creek. Eleanor Hayes felt it bite through her wool coat. The good one she'd carefully mended 3 times, the one she'd promised herself would make her look respectable, wanted, worth choosing. It hadn't worked. She stood at the end of the line of women, 7 children arranged around her like a fortress of small bodies and frightened eyes. Behind her, the afternoon sun bled orange and cold across the Montana sky, offering light but no warmth. Before her, the crowd of men shifted and muttered, their breath making ghosts in the air as they studied the merchandise. That's what she was now. Merchandise. Lot 17, the auction master called, his voice bored and nasal. Eleanor Hayes, widow, age 32. 7 children ages 3 to 13. The murmuring grew louder. A few men actually laughed. Eleanor kept her chin level, her hands folded at her waist. She'd learned long ago that dignity was sometimes all you had left, and you protected it like you'd protect your last dollar or your last match in a blizzard. Her daughter Sarah, 13 and too wise for her years, pressed closer to her side. Eleanor felt the girl's hand slip into hers, small and cold. "It's all right," Eleanor whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. The auction master cleared his throat. Opening bid, $75, includes transport and settlement fees for the woman and, he paused, consulting his ledger with obvious distaste, all 7 children. Silence answered him. Eleanor had known it would come to this. She'd known it when she'd signed the papers in Philadelphia 3 months ago, when the Bride Society representative had looked at her over wire-rimmed spectacles and said, "The frontier needs women, Mrs. Hayes. Any woman. They're not particular." She'd known it when she'd sold everything she owned to pay for the train tickets west, when she'd promised her children that they'd have a new life, a new beginning, a chance. She'd known it, and she'd come anyway, because debt collectors didn't care about your dignity, and the factory bosses in Philadelphia didn't care if your children starved while you worked 16-hour shifts. The West had seemed like hope, even if it was desperate hope, the kind that tasted like copper in your mouth. $70, the auction master tried again. His breath made clouds. 65? A man in a beaver hat spat tobacco juice into the mud. "Too fat," he said conversationally. "And 7 brats? Might as well buy a plague." Eleanor felt Sarah's hand tighten. She squeezed back, steady and sure. The other children, Thomas, James, William, Margaret, Catherine, and little Edward, stood silent as stones. She taught them that much. When people looked at you like you were nothing, you gave them nothing back. No tears, no pleading, just the knowledge that they were wrong, and someday, somehow, you'd prove it. $50, the auction master said, and now there was an edge to his voice. Behind the platform, Eleanor could see the Bride Society officials conferring in low voices. One of them, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Cromwell, kept glancing at a sheaf of papers, then at Eleanor's children. Eleanor knew what those papers were: orphanage commitments, work farm contracts, the backup plan for when merchandise didn't sell. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auction master announced, his patience clearly exhausted, "I'm authorized to inform you that if no bid is received, the children will be remanded to territorial custody under the Orphan Placement Act. The woman will be returned to Philadelphia to settle her outstanding debts." "Mama?" That was little Edward, just 3 years old. his voice high and scared. "Hush, love." Eleanor bent down, her knees protesting in the cold. She touched his cheek, red from wind and fear. "Be brave just a little longer." She straightened, meeting the eyes of the men in the crowd. Most looked away. Some stared back with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. A few looked at her the way the factory foreman used to look, calculating how much work they could extract before she broke. None of them saw her. Not really. They saw fat arms and a wide face. They saw 7 mouths to feed and 7 bodies to clothe. They saw work without profit, burden without benefit. They didn't see the woman who'd kept her family alive through a Philadelphia winter on nothing but pride and pennies. They didn't see the mother who'd learned to set bones and stitch wounds because doctors cost money. They didn't see Eleanor, who could butcher a chicken, balance a ledger, read Latin, and make a coat last 3 children across 5 winters. They saw weight, and in their minds, weight meant weakness. "Going once?" the auction master said. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Sarah was crying now, silent tears tracking down her thin face. Thomas, 11 years old and trying so hard to be a man, had his jaw clenched so tight Eleanor could see the muscle jumping. The younger children huddled together, a knot of fear and failing hope. Going twice? This was it. This was the moment Eleanor's gamble failed, the moment hope revealed itself as the liar it had always been. She should never have brought them here. She should have stayed in Philadelphia, should have found another way, should have $300. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep and rough as a rock slide. Every head turned. A man stood at the edge of the platform, and Eleanor's first thought was that he wasn't a man at all, but something carved from the mountains themselves. He stood well over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders and thick through the chest, dressed in buckskin and fur that made him look like a bear standing upright. His hair fell past his shoulders, dark and shot through with gray, and his face was all hard angles and harder lines, sharp cheekbones, a jaw like granite, and eyes the color of winter ice. The crowd parted for him, the way water parts for a stone. "Did you say 300, Caleb?" The auction master sounded stunned. "I did." The man, Caleb, moved forward with the easy grace of something wild and dangerous. His boots left deep prints in the half-frozen mud. "That cover it?" "That's—" "Yes, that more than covers it. That covers her passage, the settlement fees, provisions for the children, all 7 of them," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. The auction master blinked. Yes, all 7 children. Are you certain?" "I'm certain." Caleb's eyes swept across Eleanor's children, assessing them the way a man might assess livestock or timber. Then his gaze landed on Eleanor herself. She made herself meet it, made herself stand straight despite the trembling in her legs, despite the strange, dizzy relief flooding through her, despite the fear that came right behind it. This man was buying her children. She didn't know him, didn't know what he wanted, what he expected, what kind of life awaited them in whatever hole he'd crawled out of. But she knew what awaited them if she refused. "Mrs. Hayes," Caleb said, and his voice was surprisingly measured for a man who looked like he could tear trees out by the roots. "You understand what this is? What I'm offering?" Eleanor swallowed. "A marriage contract. Shelter and provision in exchange for domestic services." Something flickered in those ice-chip eyes. It might have been approval. "That's one way to put it. Here's another. I got a homestead up in the high country, 2-day ride from here, hard traveling. It's isolated. It's rough. Winters last 6 months and will try to kill you. The work is hard and there's a lot of it. I need someone who can cook, clean, mend, preserve food, and help me manage the place. In return, I'll provide shelter, food, protection, and I'll see your children are clothed and fed until they're old enough to make their own way." He paused, letting the words settle. "I'm not offering romance, Mrs. Hayes. I'm not offering gentle words or easy living. I'm offering survival. You do your part, I'll do mine. Your children will be safe, they'll have a roof, and they'll learn to work. That's the deal. You want it or not?" The crowd had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Eleanor looked at her children, at Sarah's tear-stained face and Thomas's desperate hope, at the little ones who didn't fully understand but knew that Mama was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting under their feet. She looked at Mrs. Cromwell in her papers. Then she looked back at Caleb Rourke, this stranger who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she'd been too proud to speak. "I want it," she said clearly. "I accept your offer." Caleb nodded once, sharp and final. "Then let's get the paperwork done. We're burning daylight." Picat. The contract signing took less than 15 minutes. Eleanor's hand shook as she wrote her name. The last time she'd sign as Eleanor Hayes, she realized. After this, she'd be Eleanor Rourke, wife to a mountain man she'd known for all of 20 minutes. The Bride Society officials seemed torn between relief at having one less problem and concern at seeing someone go off with Caleb Rourke. Mrs. Cromwell pulled Eleanor aside while Caleb was settling the payment. "Mrs. Hayes, Mrs. Rourke, do you know anything about this man?" "No more than you do, I expect." Mrs. Cromwell lowered her voice. "He's been up in those mountains for near 15 years, barely comes to town. There are stories." "What kind of stories?" "That he's dangerous, that he killed men during the war, that he came west to escape justice." Mrs. Cromwell glanced toward Caleb, who was counting out gold coins with steady, scarred hands. "I'm not saying the stories are true, mind you, but you should know what people say." Eleanor followed her gaze. Caleb looked up at that moment, meeting her eyes across the platform. His expression gave away nothing. "Mrs. Cromwell," Eleanor said quietly, "people have been telling stories about me too. That I'm lazy because I'm fat. That I'm a burden because I have children. That I'm worth less than $50. She turned back to the official. "I've learned that most people's stories say more about them than about the person they're talking about." "I pray you're right, child." "So do I." They left Covenant Creek within the hour. Caleb had a wagon waiting, sturdy and loaded with supplies. He lifted the smaller children up into the back with the same easy strength he seemed to apply to everything, then offered Eleanor a hand up to the bench seat. His palm was calloused, warm despite the cold, and large enough to swallow hers. "Thank you," she said automatically. He grunted something that might have been acknowledgement and rounded the wagon to take the driver's seat. The older children, Sarah, Thomas, and James, sat in the back with the supplies and the little ones. Eleanor could hear them whispering, but they were behaving themselves. They knew better than to cause trouble when things were uncertain. Caleb clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward, pulling the wagon away from the platform and the crowd and the life that might have been. Eleanor didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. They traveled in silence for the first hour, following a rough trail that led away from town and toward the mountains. The land here was wild and beautiful in a harsh way, rolling hills covered in sage and tough grass, stands of pine in the distances, and above it all the mountains rising like teeth against the sky. Eleanor had never seen anything like it. Philadelphia had been brick and smoke, crowded streets and factory whistles. This was space and silence, broken only by the creak of the wagon and the steady clop of hooves. "You warm enough?" Caleb asked suddenly. Eleanor started. It was the first thing he'd said since they'd left town. "Yes, thank you." Another silence, then, "Got blankets in the back if you need them. Kids, too." "We're managing," Caleb nodded. They drove on. Eleanor studied him from the corner of her eye. In the better light, away from the crowd, she could see details she'd missed before. He was probably in his mid-40s, though the lines around his eyes and mouth could have added years. His hands on the reins were steady and sure. He sat easy on the bench, comfortable with the movement of the wagon, his body relaxed despite his size. He didn't seem cruel. He didn't seem gentle either. He seemed remote, like a man who'd spent so long alone that he'd forgotten how to be otherwise. "Mr. Rourke," Eleanor said carefully, "I want to thank you for what you did back there." "No need." "I think there is. You paid far more than you had to. You took on a great deal." "I got what I need." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "You'll work hard, you'll help me run the homestead, and I'll have company besides my own thoughts. It's a fair trade." "And the children?" "They'll work too, according to their age and ability. I'm not running an orphanage, Mrs. Rourke. Everyone earns their keep." The words were harsh, but Eleanor found herself nodding. She understood this language, the language of work and worth, of practical exchange. It was honest, at least. No false promises, no pretty lies. They're good workers, she said. I've made sure of that. I can see that. Caleb glanced back at the wagon bed, where the children sat quiet and watchful. They're scared, but they're holding together. That speaks to how you've raised them. The praise, unexpected and gruff, made something warm bloom in Eleanor's chest. They've had to grow up fast. Most children do out here. Caleb returned his attention to the trail. But they'll have time to be children too, up at the homestead. Mountain's got space for that. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They rode on as the afternoon deepened toward evening, climbing gradually into the foothills. The air grew colder, sharper. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter and checked on the children. The little ones were bundled together under blankets, drowsing in the rhythm of the wagon. Sarah sat alert, watching everything with those two old eyes. "Mama," she whispered, leaning forward. Is he safe?" Eleanor met her daughter's frightened gaze. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but he's what we have. I'm scared." "I know, so am I." Eleanor reached back and squeezed Sarah's hand. "But we're together, that's what matters." Sarah nodded, wanting to believe. Eleanor turned back around, trying to believe it herself. They made camp as full dark fell, pulling off the trail into a small clearing surrounded by pines. Caleb had the wagon unhitched and a fire started in what seemed like minutes. He worked with the efficient silence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times, wasting no motion. "Kids should eat," he said, unpacking supplies. "Got salt pork, beans, and hardtack. It ain't fancy." "It's more than enough." Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the long ride. "I can cook." "Figured you could." Caleb handed her a cooking pot and a bag of beans. "Fire's hot enough." Eleanor set to work, grateful to have something to do with her hands. The children gathered around the fire, drawn to its warmth. Caleb retrieved more blankets from the wagon and distributed them without comment, making sure even little Edward got one wrapped around his shoulders. The beans and salt pork made a simple stew, but it was hot and filling. Eleanor served the children first, making sure each one ate, before taking a portion for herself. Caleb ate, standing up, away from the fire, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond their camp. "Are we in danger?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Always are, in wild country, but nothing specific tonight. Just habit." He finished his food and set the bowl aside. "You and the kids can sleep in the wagon. I'll keep watch." "All night?" "Don't need much sleep." Eleanor wanted to argue, to say it wasn't necessary, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a tide. The children were already drooping, heavy-lidded and yawning. "Thank you," she said instead. Caleb just nodded. Getting 7 children bedded down in a wagon was like trying to pack water, but Eleanor had practice. She arranged them like puzzle pieces, the little ones in the middle where it was warmest, the older ones on the edges. Sarah helped without being asked, tucking blankets around her siblings with gentle hands. "Will you sleep, Mama?" she whispered. "Soon, love." But Eleanor sat at the back of the wagon for a while, watching Caleb Rourke sit by the fire. He'd added more wood, building it up against the night cold. The flames painted his face in orange and shadow, making him look even more like something carved from stone. He'd saved them. This stranger, this mountain man with his rough words and rougher appearance, had stepped forward when no one else would. He'd paid a fortune for a fat woman and 7 children nobody wanted. He'd taken them away from the auction block and the orphanage papers and given them, if nothing else, another chance. Eleanor didn't know what to make of him. Didn't know if he was kind or cruel, if they'd be happy or merely surviving. But she knew this. Caleb Rourke had seen her family and chosen them. Not out of pity or lust or any of the reasons men usually took wives. He'd chosen them because he needed workers, and he was fair enough to take the whole package. It wasn't love. It wasn't even affection. But it was honest, and Eleanor had learned to value honesty above almost everything else. She lay down among her children, pulling a blanket over herself. Through the canvas cover, she could see stars, more stars than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. The fire crackled. The horses made soft sounds in the darkness. And somewhere out there, Caleb Rourke kept watch. Eleanor closed her eyes and for the first time in months slept without crying. They rose before dawn. Caleb already had the fire going and coffee made, thick black stuff that tasted like it could wake the dead. Eleanor drank it gratefully while the children roused themselves, shivering in the pre-dawn cold. "Long day ahead," Caleb said, handing out strips of jerky for breakfast. "We'll make the foothills by midday, start the real climb after that." "How much farther to your homestead?" Eleanor asked. "If weather holds, we'll be there tomorrow night." He glanced at the sky, which was beginning to lighten from black to deep blue. "Might snow, though. Can smell it coming." Eleanor couldn't smell anything but pine and wood smoke, but she didn't doubt him. He knew this country in a way she never would. They broke camp efficiently. The children helped without complaint, carrying blankets and packing supplies under Eleanor's direction. Even little Edward did his part, handing items up to his brothers in the wagon. Caleb watched them work with those measuring eyes, and Eleanor wondered what he saw. The trail grew steeper as morning progressed. The wagon labored upward, wheels finding purchase on rocky ground. On either side, the forest pressed closer, tall pines and the occasional aspen, their white bark stark against the dark evergreens. Eleanor heard birds calling, sounds she didn't recognize, and once a crashing in the underbrush that made her heart jump. "Elk," Caleb said without looking. "Nothing to fear." They stopped twice to rest the horses and let the children stretch their legs. During the second stop, Thomas approached Caleb hesitantly. "Sir, Mr. Rourke?" Caleb turned those ice-chip eyes on the boy. "Just Caleb. What is it?" I wanted to thank you for taking us, for taking Mama." Thomas's voice was thin but steady. "I know we're a lot. I know we're trouble, but I'll work hard. I promise. I'll do whatever you need." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. A crack in that granite face, there and gone so fast, Eleanor almost missed it. "You're not trouble," Caleb said, and his voice was gentler than Eleanor had heard it. "You're children. Children need food and shelter and someone to look after them. That's what family does." "But we're not—" Thomas stopped, confused. "You're not what?" "We're not your family, not really." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then he crouched down, bringing himself to Thomas's level. "Boy, family's not just blood. Sometimes it's choice. Sometimes it's just the people who stand together when things get hard." He put a hand on Thomas's shoulder, careful despite his size. "You and your brothers and sisters and your mama, you stood together on that platform. You didn't break. That's family. And now you're under my roof, which makes you my responsibility. That's family too." Thomas's eyes went wide and wet. "Yes, sir." "Good." Caleb straightened. "Now help your brothers get water for the horses." Eleanor watched Thomas run off, her throat tight. She caught Caleb's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded once, then returned to checking the wagon harness. The snow came in the afternoon just as Caleb had predicted. It started as flurries, pretty and light, but within an hour it was coming down thick and fast, turning the world white. Caleb pushed them harder, urging the horses forward, the wagon rocking over increasingly rough ground. "There's a shelter ahead," he called over the wind. "Old trapper's cabin. We'll hole up there for the night." Eleanor pulled the little ones closer, trying to keep them warm as snow collected on the wagon cover. Sarah and James did the same with the middle children, creating pockets of shared warmth. The cold bit deep, making Eleanor's fingers ache and her face go numb. The cabin appeared like a ghost through the snow, small and sturdy, built of stacked logs with a stone chimney. Caleb pulled the wagon right up to the door and jumped down, already moving. He had the children inside in minutes, then came back for Eleanor. "Can you handle the little ones while I see to the horses?" "Yes." "Fire makings are inside. Get it started." He was gone before she could answer, leading the horses toward a lean-to shelter she hadn't noticed. Eleanor gathered Edward and Catherine and pushed through the cabin door. Inside was dark and cold, but dry. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and there was a rough table, some shelves, and a rope bed in the corner. It was crude but clean, and right now it felt like luxury. "Sarah, help me with the fire. Thomas, James, check those shelves for supplies." Her children moved like a small army, well-drilled and efficient. Within minutes, they had a fire crackling and small bodies arranged around it. Eleanor found a broom in the corner and swept snow from their clothes and hair. The cabin was slowly warming. Caleb came in carrying armloads of supplies from the wagon. He made 3 trips, bringing in food, blankets, and Eleanor's one trunk of possessions. Snow covered his hair and shoulders, turning him into something even more elemental. "Storm's settling in hard," he said, shaking off snow. "We'll be here tonight, and maybe tomorrow." "The horses?" "Sheltered and fed. They'll be fine." He moved to the fire, holding his hands to the warmth. "You did good getting this going." "The children helped. They're good kids." He looked around at them, huddled together like puppies. "They always this quiet?" "They've learned to be careful around strangers." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'm not going to hurt them, Mrs. Rourke. Or you. I need you to know that." Eleanor met his eyes. "I'm beginning to believe it." They shared the cabin that night in careful propriety. Caleb gave Eleanor and the children the rope bed, piling them together for warmth. He took the floor by the fire, wrapped in a buffalo robe, his rifle within easy reach. Eleanor lay awake long after the children slept, listening to the storm howl outside and Caleb's steady breathing by the fire. They were married by law, but they were strangers by fact. She didn't know this man, didn't know if she could trust him or if this bargain they'd struck would become a prison. But she knew this. He could have taken advantage, could have demanded his rights as a husband, could have treated them harshly, coldly, as property he'd purchased. Instead, he'd given them warmth and safety. He'd spoken gently to her son. He'd made sure even the smallest child had a blanket. Maybe that was enough. For now, maybe that was enough. Eleanor closed her eyes and slept, while outside the storm buried the world in white. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the world transformed. Eleanor woke to silence, not the absence of sound, but a different kind of quiet, thick and muffled, like the world was holding its breath. Through the cabin's single window, she could see snow piled nearly 3 feet deep, glittering in the pale morning light. Caleb was already up, adding wood to the fire. He moved quietly despite his size, trying not to wake the children still tangled together on the rope bed. "Morning," he said when he noticed Eleanor stirring. "Coffee's on." "Thank you." Eleanor carefully extracted herself from the pile of sleeping children, tucking blankets around them. Catherine murmured something in her sleep and burrowed deeper. "How bad is it out there?" "Bad enough. We'll need to dig out before we can move the wagon." Caleb poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handing her one. "Might take most of the day." Eleanor accepted the coffee, wrapping her cold hands around the cup's warmth. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the same kind of practical assessment she'd learned to make herself. Weather, supplies, effort required versus reward. It was the arithmetic of survival. "The children and I can help," she said. "The older ones, maybe. Little ones should stay inside where it's warm." He took a long drink of his coffee, studying her over the rim. "You ever work in snow like this?" "No, Philadelphia got snow, but nothing like this. It's hard work, wet and cold. Your hands will ache and your back will hurt." "I'm used to hard work, Mr. Rourke, and I'm stronger than I look." Something flickered in his expression, that same crack in the granite she'd seen when he'd spoken to Thomas. "I don't doubt that, Mrs. Rourke. Woman who kept 7 children alive on her own doesn't get to be weak." The acknowledgement settled between them, honest and ungarnished. Eleanor found herself warming to this man despite his rough edges, or perhaps because of them. He didn't offer pretty words or false comfort, but he saw her. Really saw her, past the weight and the worry lines and the desperation that had driven her west. "We should feed the children before we start," she said. "They'll be hungry." "Already thought of that." Caleb gestured to the fireplace, where a pot was warming. "Made porridge. Nothing fancy, but it'll stick to their ribs." Eleanor moved to check it, stirring the thick oats. Caleb had added dried berries and a touch of honey, small kindnesses that spoke louder than any speech. She heard rustling behind her as the children began to wake, drawn by the smell of food and the warmth of the fire. Edward sat up first, his hair sticking up in all directions. "Mama?" "Right here, sweetheart." Eleanor turned to smile at him. "We're snowed in for a bit, but we're safe and warm." The children emerged from their nest of blankets like chicks from an egg, rumpled, sleepy, and cautiously hopeful. Caleb watched them with those measuring eyes as Eleanor served breakfast, making sure each child got a full portion. "Mr. Rourke," Sarah said quietly, accepting her bowl. "Thank you for the shelter." "Just Caleb," he said, the same words he'd given Thomas. "And you're welcome." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the scrape of spoons against bowls. When everyone had finished, Caleb stood and stretched, his head nearly brushing the cabin's low ceiling. "All right, Thomas, James, William, you're with me and your mother. We're going to dig out the wagon and clear a path. Sarah, you're in charge inside. Keep the fire going and watch the little ones." Sarah nodded solemnly, already moving to gather her younger siblings. Eleanor felt a surge of pride at her daughter's competence, the way she'd learned to step up without being asked. Outside, the world was blindingly white. Snow covered everything in soft, deceptive drifts that hid rocks and roots. The wagon was buried to its wheel hubs, and the lean-to shelter where the horses stood looked like a snow fort. "We start with the horses," Caleb said, handing shovels to Thomas and James. "Clear the lean-to first. Make sure they've got room and can see out. Then we dig out the wagon." He looked at Eleanor. "You good with the shovel?" "I'll manage." The work was exactly as brutal as Caleb had warned. The snow was heavy and wet, each shovelful a strain on Eleanor's back and shoulders. Within minutes, she was sweating despite the cold, her breath coming hard. But she kept pace with the boys, matching them stroke for stroke, refusing to be the weak link. Caleb worked like a machine, moving snow in quantities that seemed impossible. His shoulders flexed under his buckskin shirt, powerful and sure. He didn't talk much, just directed the work with quiet efficiency, showing the boys where to put their effort for maximum effect. "Good," he'd say when Thomas found the right angle for his shovel. "That's it. Use your legs, not your back." Or to James, "Don't try to lift too much at once. Small loads, steady pace, you'll last longer." He was teaching them, Eleanor realized, not just ordering them around, but showing them how to work smart, how to husband their strength. The boys responded to it, their backs straightening with pride at his praise. They'd been working for perhaps an hour when Eleanor heard it, a sound like distant thunder, but wrong somehow. She looked up, scanning the mountains, and saw Caleb frozen, his head cocked, listening. "What is it?" she asked. "Quiet." His voice was sharp, then louder. "Everyone inside. Now." The tone brooked no argument. Thomas and James dropped their shovels and ran. Eleanor started to follow, but Caleb caught her arm. "Get them away from the windows. Get them under the table or against the back wall." "Caleb, what?" "Do it now." He was already moving, heading not for the cabin, but for the lean-to, for the horses. Eleanor ran. She burst through the cabin door and found Sarah already gathering the children, her face frightened but controlled. "Under the table," Eleanor commanded. "All of you, now." They obeyed without question, cramming themselves into the small space. Eleanor crouched with them, wrapping her arms around as many as she could reach. Through the window, she could see Caleb leading the horses out of the lean-to, moving them toward the cabin. And then she heard what he'd heard, a roar like the world ending, growing louder. Avalanche. She saw the snow wall hit, a churning white monster that swept through the trees 100 yards upslope. It missed them, but not by much. The cabin shook. Snow and ice pelted the roof. The roar filled the world, drowning out Edward's frightened crying and Margaret's prayers. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Eleanor waited, counting heartbeats. When nothing else came, she carefully disentangled herself from the children and moved to the window. The landscape had changed. Where there had been a gentle slope, there was now a jagged scar of broken trees and churned snow. The avalanche had carved a new path down the mountain, and if they'd been a little further upslope, if Caleb hadn't heard it coming. The door opened and Caleb entered, leading both horses inside the cabin. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked, too shocked to be polite. "Keeping them alive." Caleb guided the animals to the far corner, away from the fire. "The lean-to's gone. Avalanche took it. They stay in here or they freeze." "But in the cabin? With the children?" Horses are clean, they're gentle, and they'll add warmth. Caleb's voice was flat, brooking no argument. Children need to learn to live with animals anyway, if they're going to survive in this country. He was right, Eleanor knew, but it was still strange to have two large horses standing in what passed for their living room. The children stared wide-eyed. Little Edward actually giggled. "Can I touch them?" he asked. "Gentle," Caleb said. "Let them smell your hand first." He showed Edward how to approach the horses, how to move slowly and speak softly. Soon, all the children were gathered around, tentatively petting the animals' soft noses. The horses, used to Caleb's presence, accepted the attention calmly. Eleanor watched Caleb with her children, this rough mountain man crouching down to guide small hands, his voice patient as he explained about horses and their care. He could have been harsh, could have told them to stay away, to be quiet, to stop being underfoot. Instead, he was teaching them, the same way he'd taught the boys to shovel. "You're good with them," she said quietly. Caleb glanced up, then back to the children. "Had younger brothers once, long time ago?" The past tense hung heavy in the air. Eleanor wanted to ask, wanted to know what had happened to those brothers, what had driven Caleb into these mountains alone. But the set of his shoulders told her the door was closed on that subject. "We're stuck here another night at least," Caleb said, standing. "Maybe two. The trail's going to be dangerous after that slide. Do we have enough supplies?" "We do. I always pack extra." He moved to check the supplies he'd brought in, taking inventory. "We'll be fine. Tight quarters, but fine." Tight quarters was an understatement. 2 adults, 7 children, and 2 horses in a one-room cabin made for cramped living. But Eleanor had learned to make do with less. She organized the children, setting them tasks, folding blankets, organizing supplies, keeping the fire fed. Sarah helped her prepare the midday meal, a simple stew made from salt pork and dried vegetables. They ate in shifts, the children first, then Eleanor and Caleb. The horses munched hay in their corner, their presence oddly comforting. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and cooking and animal warmth, not unpleasant, just different from anything Eleanor had known. "Tell me about your homestead," Eleanor said as they ate. "What should we expect when we get there?" Caleb chewed thoughtfully before answering. "It's bigger than this. 2 rooms, a main room with the kitchen and living area, and a sleeping loft. There's a barn for the animals, a root cellar, a smokehouse. I've got about 40 acres cleared, another 100 still forested." "What do you raise?" "Some cattle, chickens, a milk cow, vegetable garden in summer. I trap and hunt for meat and furs, cut timber when I need cash money." He paused. "It's not fancy, Mrs. Rourke. It's a working homestead, but it's solid, and it'll keep us fed and sheltered." "It sounds wonderful," Eleanor said honestly. After months of uncertainty, the idea of a real home, even a rough one, seemed like paradise. "It's isolated," Caleb warned. "Nearest neighbor is 10 miles. Town is a 2-day ride in good weather, longer in winter. You'll be alone a lot when I'm out checking trap lines or hunting. You comfortable with that?" "I'm comfortable with whatever keeps my children safe and fed." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "You're a practical woman, Mrs. Rourke." "I've had to be." "That'll serve you well up here." He set his empty bowl aside. "Mountain doesn't care about pretty words or fine feelings. It only cares about what you can do." "Then the mountain and I should get along just fine." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Caleb's face, there and gone like winter sun. "I believe we will, Mrs. Rourke. I believe we will." The afternoon passed in strange domesticity. The children, confined by the storm and the close quarters, grew restless. Eleanor set them to lessons, reading from the one book she'd brought, practicing their letters on the back of old papers with a stub of pencil. Caleb watched this with interest. "They all read?" he asked. "The older ones, yes. I'm teaching the younger ones." Eleanor looked up from where she was helping Catherine sound out words. "Education matters, even here." "Especially here," Caleb said. "Smart people survive better than strong people, in the long run." He moved to his pack and pulled out a worn book. "Got this, if they want it. Robinson Crusoe. Read it so many times I've got parts memorized." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? May I?" "It's yours." Caleb handed it over. "All of yours. A homestead needs books." Eleanor felt something warm and dangerous unfurl in her chest. Something like hope, or maybe gratitude, or maybe something she wasn't ready to name. This man kept surprising her with these small kindnesses, these moments of thoughtfulness that didn't fit the image of a rough mountain recluse. As evening fell, they arranged themselves for another night in the crowded cabin. The horses dozed in their corner, the children piled together on the rope bed, with Sarah reading aloud from Robinson Crusoe by firelight. Her voice was soft and clear, and even the littlest ones listened, captivated by the story of survival and perseverance. Eleanor sat by the fire with Caleb, mending a tear in William's coat. Her needle flashed in the firelight, pulling thread through fabric with practiced ease. "Where'd you learn that?" Caleb asked, nodding at her work. "Factory. I did piecework, mending and alteration. It was better than the assembly lines." Eleanor bit off a thread. "Paid less, but I could bring it home, work while watching the children." "Your husband," Caleb started, then stopped. "It's all right, you can ask." Eleanor smoothed the mended fabric. "He was a good man, a dock worker, strong and kind and honest." Her voice grew soft. "There was an accident. A chain broke. A load fell. He was killed instantly. I'm sorry." "So am I. But I had 7 children to feed and no time for grief." She looked up at him. "The factory paid barely enough to keep us alive. The debt collectors came anyway, medical bills from the births, rent, everything. I tried. I worked 16, 18 hours a day, but it was never enough." Caleb was quiet, watching the fire. "So you came west?" "So I came west, because even desperate hope is better than certain death." Eleanor set the mended coat aside. "What about you? What brought you to these mountains?" "War," Caleb said simply. "I was a different man before. Had a wife, a farm, a future. Then the war came and took it all. Took my brothers. Took my wife while I was gone. Fever took her and our baby both." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Eleanor could hear the pain underneath like bedrock. "When I came back, there was nothing left. So I came here where the quiet doesn't judge and the work doesn't ask questions." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, echoing his words back to him. "So am I." Caleb stood, moving to add wood to the fire. "But the past doesn't change. Only thing we can do is keep moving forward." "Is that what this is?" Eleanor asked. "Moving forward?" Caleb looked at her across the firelight. "I don't know yet, Mrs. Rourke, but it's something, and something's better than nothing." Eleanor nodded slowly. She understood that arithmetic too, the cold calculation of hope versus despair, of trying versus giving up. They were both survivors, she and this mountain man, both scarred, both carrying losses they couldn't speak. But they were both still here, still fighting, still choosing to move forward even when the path was unclear. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could ask. The fire crackled. Sarah's voice rose and fell, telling of storms and shipwrecks and survival against impossible odds. The children listened, safe and warm, while outside the snow lay deep and dangerous. And Eleanor Hayes Rourke sat with her stranger husband in a cabin that smelled of horses and wood smoke, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility. The morning of their 3rd day in the cabin dawned clear and cold. Caleb was up before first light, checking the conditions outside. When he came back in, stamping snow from his boots, he looked cautiously optimistic. "Trail should be passable if we're careful. The slide settled overnight, and the new snow's packed down some." He glanced at Eleanor. "It'll be slow going, but we can make it." "Then we should start as soon as possible," Eleanor said, already organizing the children. "Before the weather turns again." They broke camp with practiced efficiency now, the children moving as a unit to pack supplies and prepare the wagon. Caleb led the horses outside and hitched them, checking every strap and buckle twice. Eleanor could see the care he took, the way he ran his hands over the animal's legs, checking for injury or weakness. "They're good horses," he said, more to himself than to her. "Steady, they'll get us through." The trail was treacherous, snow hid rocks and holes, and in places the path seemed to have disappeared entirely. Caleb drove with intense concentration, reading the landscape with eyes that saw things Eleanor couldn't. Several times he stopped to get down and walk ahead, testing the ground before trusting it with the wagon's weight. "Is it always like this?" Eleanor asked during one of these stops. "Winter travel? Usually worse." Caleb pointed to a section of trail ahead. "See how the snow sits there? That's a false surface. Underneath there's probably a washout or a fallen tree. We try to drive over that, we'll break an axle or lose a wheel." "How can you tell?" "Practice and mistakes." He climbed back onto the bench. "I've broken enough axles to know what to look for." They picked their way forward mile by careful mile. The children were quiet in the back, sensing the tension. Even little Edward seemed to understand that this was not the time for questions or complaints. The sun was past its zenith when Caleb suddenly pulled the horses to a stop. His body had gone rigid, alert in a way that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. "What is it?" "Riders." Caleb's voice was low. "Behind us. Been following for the last mile." Eleanor twisted to look back but saw nothing except trees and snow. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Caleb's hand moved to the rifle beside him. "Could be nothing. Could be trouble. Either way, we keep moving." He clicked to the horses. "Mrs. Rourke, I need you to stay calm and keep the children quiet. If I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. Understand?" "Yes." Eleanor's mouth had gone dry. "Who would be following us?" "Don't know yet, but people don't usually trail folks through mountains in winter for friendly reasons." They continued, the wagon creaking through the snow. Eleanor kept glancing back, her heart hammering, and then she saw them, 3 riders emerging from the tree line behind them, moving faster than the wagon could manage. "Caleb." "I see them." His voice was grim. "Hold on." He urged the horses faster, but the wagon was heavy and the trail difficult. The riders gained ground quickly. Within minutes, they were close enough for Eleanor to see details: rough men on rougher horses, their faces hard and their clothes worn. The lead rider, a thin man with a scarred face, called out, "Rourke! Caleb Rourke! Hold up there!" Caleb kept driving. "I said hold up!" The rider spurred his horse forward, cutting in front of the wagon. Caleb was forced to stop or run him down. The 3 men spread out, surrounding the wagon. Eleanor pulled the children close, her body shielding them. She could see Caleb's hand on his rifle, his face set and cold. "What do you want, Crowley?" Caleb's voice was flat. The scarred man, Crowley, grinned, showing broken teeth. "Now is that any way to greet an old business associate? I heard you were in Covenant Creek, buying yourself a wife and a ready-made family. Thought I'd ride out, offer congratulations." "Congratulations offered. Now move." "Not so fast." Crowley's eyes slid to Eleanor, assessing and dismissive. "That's the fat woman from the auction, ain't it? The one nobody wanted. You must have been desperate, Rourke, to pay $300 for that." Eleanor felt the insult like a physical blow, but she kept her face still. Beside her, Caleb had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. "You've got 5 seconds to move your horse, Crowley." "Or what? You'll shoot me in front of your new wife and all those children?" Crowley laughed. "I don't think so. You've gone soft, Rourke. Time was, you'd have already put a bullet in me. Time was, you'd have been smart enough not to provoke me." The air crackled with tension. Eleanor could feel it, sharp and dangerous. One of the other riders, a younger man with nervous eyes, shifted in his saddle. "Crowley, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Crowley never took his eyes off Caleb. "Here's the thing, Rourke. That land of yours, it's sitting on a nice water source, water that runs down to my grazing lands, and I've decided I want it. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale, question is price." Crowley gestured at the wagon. "See, I'm thinking a man with a new wife and 7 mouths to feed might need cash, might be willing to sell for, say, $500. My land's worth 10 times that, and you know it." "Maybe, but it's worth nothing if you're dead." Crowley's hand moved to his gun. "So, here's my offer, $500, or I make sure you have an accident on this mountain. Your choice." Eleanor felt cold certainty settle over her. This man meant it. He would kill Caleb, kill her, maybe even kill the children if they got in his way. She could see it in his eyes, the casual cruelty of someone who valued property over life. But she could also see something else. She could see Caleb's hand steady on his rifle, his body coiled and ready. She could see the other two riders' nervousness, the way they kept glancing at each other. And she could see, with sudden clarity, that Crowley was bluffing. He was afraid of Caleb. That's why he'd brought two men. That's why he was talking instead of shooting. He was hoping to intimidate, to threaten without actually fighting, because he knew that in a real fight, Caleb Rourke would destroy him. "Mr. Crowley," Eleanor said clearly, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "You should leave now." Crowley's eyes snapped to her. "What?" "You heard me. You should leave, because you're not going to shoot anyone, and you're not going to get my husband's land, and every second you stay here makes you look more foolish." "Foolish?" Crowley's face darkened. "Woman, you don't know who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to. A bully and a coward who thinks he can frighten people into giving him what he wants." Eleanor straightened, feeling her children pressed against her back, drawing strength from their need for her to be strong. "But you picked the wrong people to threaten, Mr. Crowley. My husband isn't afraid of you, and neither am I." For a moment, Crowley just stared at her, shock and rage warring on his scarred face. Then he started to laugh, a harsh, ugly sound. "Well, well, the fat lady's got teeth." He looked at Caleb. "That's quite a wife you bought yourself, Rourke. Pity she won't live long enough to warm your bed." He went for his gun. Caleb was faster. The rifle came up smooth as water, and the crack of the shot echoed off the mountains. Crowley's hat flew off his head, and his horse reared. The other two riders' horses spooked, dancing sideways. In the chaos, Caleb had the rifle reloaded and aimed before any of them could draw. "Next one doesn't miss," Caleb said quietly. "Now ride." Crowley's face had gone white. His hand hovered near his gun, but he didn't draw. For a long moment, he and Caleb stared at each other, a contest of wills that Eleanor could feel crackling in the air. Then Crowley jerked his horse around. "This isn't over, Rourke." "Yes, it is. You come near my family again, I won't aim high." Caleb's voice was flat and final. "Now, get off my mountain." The three men rode away, fast and angry. Caleb watched them until they disappeared into the trees, then slowly lowered the rifle. His hands, Eleanor noticed, were completely steady. "Are they gone?" Sarah's voice was small and frightened from the back of the wagon. "They're gone," Caleb said. He looked at Eleanor, and something new was in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "You shouldn't have spoken up like that. Could have gotten yourself killed." "Could have. Didn't." Eleanor found she was shaking now, the fear catching up with her. He was bluffing. Maybe, maybe not. Caleb clicked to the horses, getting them moving again. Either way, it was a brave thing to do. Or a foolish one. Sometimes those are the same thing. They drove in silence for a while, putting distance between themselves and the confrontation. Eleanor's heart gradually slowed, her breathing steadied. Behind her, she could hear the children whispering, processing what had happened. "Will they come back?" she asked finally. "Probably. Crowley doesn't let things go." Caleb's jaw was tight. "But not today. And by the time they try again, we'll be home. On my land, with my guns and my walls. Let them come then. You fought him before. Different kind of fight. He's been trying to get my land for years. Legal challenges, mostly. Trying to prove I don't have clear title, that I'm squatting. Never worked." Caleb glanced at her. "But he's getting desperate. Water rights are valuable, and mine control the flow to his whole spread. He needs that water, or his cattle operation fails. So he'll keep trying." "Yes." Caleb's voice was grim. "But now he knows you're not just decoration. That you'll stand. That makes you dangerous to him." Eleanor didn't know if that was a compliment or a warning. Maybe both. They pushed hard the rest of the day, Caleb driving them forward with single-minded determination. The trail climbed higher into the mountains, the air growing thinner and colder. Eleanor could see peaks all around them now, white and sharp against the blue sky. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold, Caleb pointed ahead. "There," he said. "Home." Eleanor looked and saw, Nestled in a small valley between protective ridges, a homestead. The house was larger than the cabin, built of solid logs with a stone chimney from which smoke curled. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings. Rail fences marked pastures, and she could see cattle moving in the distance. It was rough and remote and beautiful. It was home. The children's exhausted silence broke into excited whispers as the wagon descended into the valley. Even after days of hard travel and the frightening confrontation with Crowley, the sight of the homestead sparked something in them. Hope, maybe, or relief that their journey was finally ending. Eleanor felt it too, though she tempered it with caution. A house was just wood and stone until you filled it with living. They'd survived the journey, but now came the harder part, making this strange place into something that felt like home. Caleb drove the wagon right up to the house and set the brake. Before Eleanor could climb down, he was there, offering his hand. His palm was warm and rough, and she took it without hesitation now, letting him help her to the frozen ground. "Welcome home, Mrs. Rourke," he said quietly. The words settled over her like a blessing she wasn't sure she deserved. "Thank you." The children tumbled out of the wagon, stretching cramped legs and looking around with wide eyes. The house was solidly built, chinked tight against the weather, with real glass windows that caught the last rays of sunlight. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Eleanor wondered who had laid the fire. "Got a neighbor woman who comes by once a week when I'm gone," Caleb explained, reading her expression. "Mrs. Chen. She'll have stocked the fire and checked the place. Good woman. You'll like her." He opened the door and gestured them inside. Eleanor entered first, the children clustering behind her like ducklings. The interior was simple but well made. The main room held a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table with benches, shelves lined with supplies, and a kitchen area with a proper stove. Stairs led up to what must be the sleeping loft. The walls were chinked and solid. The floor was wooden planks instead of packed dirt, and everything was clean and orderly in a way that spoke of careful maintenance. "It's wonderful," Eleanor breathed, and meant it. After the tenement in Philadelphia, after the crowded wagon and the tiny cabin, this felt spacious and safe. "Loft's got 2 sleeping areas," Caleb said, hauling in their belongings. "Figured the children could have one side, you the other. I'll take the main room down here." Eleanor turned to look at him, surprised. "You don't have to. We're married, I understand." "We're married by law, Mrs. Rourke, but we're strangers by fact." Caleb set down her trunk with careful gentleness. "I meant what I said on that platform. I'm not offering romance. When and if you're ready for more than a business arrangement, that's your choice to make. Until then, I sleep down here." The respect in his words made Eleanor's throat tight. How many men would have insisted on their rights, would have demanded what the law said belonged to them? But Caleb Rourke was giving her space, giving her choice, treating her like a person instead of property. "Thank you," she said softly. Thank you." He nodded once and turned to the children. "All right, you lot, let's get you settled before full dark. Thomas, James, William, help me unload the wagon. Sarah, Margaret, Catherine, help your mother figure out the kitchen. Edward, you can explore, but don't touch anything sharp." The children scattered to their tasks, and Eleanor found herself smiling at how naturally they responded to Caleb's authority. He wasn't harsh, but he was clear, and children responded to clarity the way plants responded to sun. The kitchen was better supplied than Eleanor had dared hope. There was flour and cornmeal, salt pork and dried beans, preserved vegetables in jars, and even a small store of precious coffee and sugar. The stove was well maintained and drew properly, and there was a good stock of firewood stacked near the door. "Mrs. Chen's work," Caleb said, catching Eleanor's appreciative survey. "Told you she was good people. I need to thank her. She'll be by tomorrow or the next day, once she sees the smoke. Likes to check on things." Caleb paused. "She's Chinese. Came here with her husband 20 years back. Some folks in town don't care for her, I do. Want to make sure that's clear from the start." Eleanor met his eyes. "Mr. Rourke, I've been judged for my weight, my poverty, and my children my entire life. I'm the last person who judged someone for where they came from." Something that might have been approval flickered in his expression. "Good. Then you and Mrs. Chen should get along fine." They worked together preparing the evening meal. Eleanor at the stove, Caleb bringing in supplies, the children setting the table and organizing their few possessions. It felt almost domestic, this shared labor, and Eleanor found herself falling into a rhythm with this strange man who was now her husband. Dinner was simple but hot: beans and salt pork, cornbread baked in the oven, coffee for the adults and milk for the children that Caleb fetched from the spring house. They ate at the big table, all 9 of them crowded together, and for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. They were safe. They were warm. They were fed. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. After dinner, Caleb showed the children the loft while Eleanor cleaned up. She could hear him above, his deep voice explaining where things went, how to bank the small stove up there for warmth, where the chamber pot was kept. He was patient with their questions, answering even Edward's endless stream of why with good humor. When the children were settled, Caleb came back down and found Eleanor still at the sink, washing dishes by lamplight. "You should rest," he said. "It's been a long few days." "So should you." Eleanor dried the last plate and set it on the shelf. "But I wanted to ask, what happens now? Tomorrow, I mean. What do you need from me?" Caleb moved to the fireplace, adding wood for the night. "Tomorrow we settle in. I'll show you how things work here. The animals, the supplies, the routine. The boys need to learn to handle stock and chop wood. Sarah's old enough to help with cooking and preserving. The little ones can start with simple chores." "And me?" "You'll run the house, cook, clean, mend, preserve food for winter, help with the animals when needed. It's hard work, Mrs. Rourke, harder than anything you did in Philadelphia, likely." "I'm not afraid of hard work." "I know." Caleb straightened, dusting bark from his hands. "I saw that when you kept pace with the boys shoveling snow. When you stood up to Crowley despite being terrified. You're stronger than most people give you credit for." The praise warmed Eleanor more than the fire. "You see things other people miss." "I see what's there. Most people see what they expect." He paused, studying her. "I expected a desperate woman. Someone broken by circumstances. What I got was a fighter. We're both fighters, I think, just fighting different battles." "Maybe." Caleb moved toward his bedroll, which he'd laid out near the fire. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Rourke. Tomorrow starts early." Eleanor climbed to the loft where the children were already asleep in a tumbled pile of blankets and limbs. She lay down on her own pallet, listening to their breathing, to the pop and crackle of the fire below, to the wind moving through the pines outside. She was married to a stranger in a strange land, with danger lurking in the form of Crowley, and who knew what else. But she was also safe, sheltered, and for the first time in years not facing the world alone. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The first week at the homestead passed in a blur of learning and adjustment. Caleb rose before dawn each day and expected everyone else to do the same. Eleanor learned to work the kitchen stove's temperamental damper, to fetch water from the spring without spilling, to render fat and make soap and preserve meat. The work was endless and exhausting, but it was also satisfying in a way factory labor had never been. Here she could see the results of her effort: meals that fed her family, clothes that kept them warm, a house that slowly began to feel lived in and loved. The children adapted faster than Eleanor expected. Thomas and James took to ranch work like they'd been born to it, following Caleb around with eager questions. He taught them to milk the cow, to feed and water the stock, to check fences and chop wood. William, younger but determined not to be left out, tagged along and did what he could. Sarah became Eleanor's right hand, learning to bake bread and churn butter, to preserve vegetables and mend clothes. She was careful and precise, with a domestic talent Eleanor recognized from her own mother. Even the little ones found their place. Margaret gathered eggs from the chickens with solemn concentration. Catherine helped set the table and fold laundry. Edward, at 3, mostly got underfoot, but he did it cheerfully, and Caleb showed surprising patience with the boy's endless curiosity. "Why are the chickens called chickens?" Edward asked one morning, watching Caleb scatter feed. "Because someone decided that's what they'd be called," Caleb said seriously. "But why not call them birds?" "They are birds, but chickens more specific." "Why?" "Because language needs specific words for specific things." "Why?" Caleb crouched down to Edward's level. "Tell you what, you ask me 3 more why questions today, and I'll answer them all. But Only 3. After that, you have to figure things out yourself. Deal? Edward considered this gravely. Deal. Eleanor watched from the doorway, a basket of laundry on her hip, and felt that dangerous warmth bloom again in her chest. Caleb was good with children, not indulgent, but fair and patient in a way that earned their respect. They were beginning to look to him not just as the man who fed them, but as someone they could trust. On the 8th day, Mrs. Chen arrived. Eleanor heard the wagon before she saw it, a light rig pulled by a single horse, driven by a small woman who moved with brisk efficiency. She was perhaps 60, with silver-threaded black hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp dark eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Chen?" Caleb greeted her, coming out to help with her horse. "Good to see you." "Mr. Rourke, I see you brought back company." Mrs. Chen's English was accented but clear. She studied Eleanor with frank curiosity. "The wife from town, yes?" "Yes, Eleanor Rourke. This is Mrs. Chen. Best neighbor a man could ask for." Mrs. Chen nodded to Eleanor. "Heard about the auction. Heard you had 7 children. Heard Caleb paid more than anyone expected." She smiled, and it transformed her stern face. "Good. This house needs children, needs life." "Thank you for maintaining the house while Mr. Rourke was gone," Eleanor said. "Everything was perfect." "Not perfect, but good enough." Mrs. Chen climbed down from her wagon. "I brought supplies. Also, news from town you should know." They went inside, and Mrs. Chen accepted coffee and a seat at the table. The children gathered around, curious about this new person. Mrs. Chen studied them each in turn, then nodded as if they'd passed some invisible test. "Good children, quiet but not broken. That's right." She turned to Caleb. "Now, the news. Silas Crowley was in town 3 days ago. Told people you threatened him on the mountain. Tried to shoot him, he says." "I shot his hat off when he drew on me," Caleb said flatly. "After he threatened my family." "I know. Everyone with sense knows. Crowley is liar and cheat." Mrs. Chen sipped her coffee. "But he went to territorial marshal, filed complaint, said you're dangerous, said your wife incited you, said the children aren't safe." Eleanor felt ice slide down her spine. "He's trying to take the children." "He's trying to take the land," Caleb corrected grimly. "The children are just leverage. If he can get them declared in danger, get them removed, he thinks Eleanor will leave. And if Eleanor leaves—" "The marriage contract is void," Eleanor finished. "And you're back to being alone. Easier to pressure, easier to drive off your land." "Exactly." Caleb's jaw was set hard. "How much time do we have?" "Marshall is in Covenant Creek now. We'll come to investigate, maybe in 2 weeks. Maybe 3, if weather slows him." Mrs. Chen looked between them. "You need to be prepared. House must be perfect. Children must be clean, healthy, happy. No signs of neglect or danger." "There won't be," Eleanor said firmly. "My children are well cared for. I know this. Marshall will know this too when he sees, but Crowley will make trouble." Mrs. Chen set down her cup. "There is more. Crowley tried to file claim on your water rights, said you abandoned land for too long, that he has prior use." "That's a lie. I was gone 8 days." "Yes. But he has papers. False papers, but papers." Mrs. Chen's expression was grim. "He has bought clerk in land office. Man named Peterson. This Peterson will say whatever Crowley pays him to say." Caleb stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders, the rage he was barely containing. "So Crowley's coming at us from 2 directions, legal challenges and claims about the children." "He is desperate," Mrs. Chen agreed. "Water is everything to rancher. Without your stream, his cattle will die next summer. He will do anything." "Then we'll fight him on both fronts." Eleanor surprised herself with the steel in her voice. "We'll show the marshal that our children are thriving, and we'll fight his false claims in court." Caleb turned to look at her. "You understand what that means? Going to territorial court, facing down lawyers and bought officials?" "I understand that Crowley thinks we're easy targets. A mountain recluse and a fat woman with too many children." Eleanor stood, meeting Caleb's eyes. "I understand that he's wrong, and I understand that if we don't fight, we lose everything." Something fierce and approving flashed in Caleb's expression. Then we fight. Mrs. Chen smiled. Good. You will need help. My husband knows law, studied in San Francisco before we came here. He will help you prepare. I will help make house perfect for Marshall. She stood. Also, I will talk to other neighbors. Not everyone likes Crowley. Some will stand with you. We'd be grateful, Caleb said. No gratitude needed. We help neighbors. Is right thing. Mrs. Chen moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Crowley has hired men. 3, maybe 4. They watch the trails, watch who comes and goes. Be careful. After Mrs. Chen left, Eleanor and Caleb stood together in the sudden silence. Outside, the children were doing their chores, their voices carrying faintly through the walls. Inside, the fire crackled and the clock ticked, marking time until the marshal's arrival. I brought this on you, Eleanor said quietly. If I hadn't spoken up on that mountain, you'd be dead, and so would the children. Caleb's voice was firm. Crowley would have found another excuse. This isn't your fault. But the children. We'll be fine. We'll make sure of it. Caleb moved closer, and Eleanor realized it was the nearest they'd been since that first handshake on the auction platform. She could see the gray threaded through his dark hair, the old scars on his hands, the absolute certainty in his eyes. Mrs. Rourke, Eleanor, I need you to understand something. I chose you and those children. I knew what I was getting. And I don't go back on my choices. Even when they bring trouble? Especially then. Trouble shows what people are made of. He paused. You stood up to Crowley armed with nothing but words. You kept 7 children alive through poverty I can barely imagine. You crossed half a continent on desperate hope. You think I'm afraid of one corrupt rancher and some bought officials? Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I think you're either very brave or very foolish. Told you those are sometimes the same thing. Caleb almost smiled. We've got 2 weeks, maybe 3. We use that time to prepare. Make this house shine. Make sure the children are healthy and educated and clearly well cared for. Get our legal defense ready. And if Crowley wants a fight, we'll give him one he won't forget. Together, Eleanor said. Together, Caleb agreed. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Eleanor cleaned the house until it gleamed, washing windows and scrubbing floors, mending every piece of clothing until the children looked respectable if not prosperous. She kept careful records of meals and lessons, documenting everything in case the marshal asked for proof of her care. Caleb and Mr. Chen, a scholarly man with wire-rimmed glasses and a precise manner, went through every land document, every water right claim, building their case. They found discrepancies in Crowley's filings, evidence of fraud in Peterson's notarizations, witnesses who had testified to Crowley's threats and intimidation. The children, sensing the importance, were on their best behavior. They did their chores without complaint, helped each other with lessons, and showed the kind of cooperative competence that made Eleanor proud. Sarah took Thomas aside one evening. We need to be perfect, she told him. Mama and Caleb are fighting for us. We can't give them any more to worry about. I know, Thomas said. I heard Mama crying last night. She thought I was asleep, but I heard her. She's scared. So am I. Thomas's voice cracked. What if they take us away? What if we lose this? Sarah hugged her brother, both of them too young to carry such weight, but carrying it anyway. Then we fight too. We show them we belong here, that we're a family. Eleanor, listening from the loft stairs, had to turn away. Her children were so brave, so resilient. They deserved better than this constant uncertainty, this endless struggle. But they also deserved to know that their mother would fight for them with everything she had. And now, for the first time in years, she wasn't fighting alone. Caleb found her later, sitting by the fire with her mending. Children asleep? Finally, they're worried. Smart children should be worried. Shows they understand what's at stake. Caleb poured himself coffee and sat across from her. But they should also know we're going to win. How can you be so certain? Because Crowley's case is built on lies, and lies fall apart under scrutiny. Because the marshal, I know him, knew him during the war, is a fair man who'll see through Crowley's scheming. And because we have something Crowley doesn't. What's that? Truth. and people willing to stand for it. Caleb leaned forward. Mrs. Chen's been talking to neighbors. The Johnsons are coming to testify about Crowley's threats. The Parkers will speak to our good character. Even old Henderson, who doesn't like anybody, said he'd swear that your children are the best behaved he's seen. Eleanor felt hope kindle. Really? Really? You've made friends here, Eleanor, without even trying. People see how hard you work, how well you care for your family. They see you're genuine. He paused. They see what I saw on that platform. Someone worth choosing. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Eleanor wasn't quite ready to examine. Thank you, she said softly. No thanks needed. It's just truth. Caleb stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow Mr. Chen's bringing the legal papers to review. We need sharp minds. But sleep eluded Eleanor that night. She lay in the loft, listening to her children breathe, thinking about truth and lies, about fighting and surviving, about this strange new life she was building with a man who saw her as no one else ever had. The marshal arrived on a cold, clear morning 16 days after Mrs. Chen's warning. Eleanor had the children scrubbed and dressed, the house spotless, a pot of stew simmering on the stove. Caleb stood beside her as they watched the rider approach, and she drew strength from his solid presence. Marshal Grant was a weathered man in his 50s, with tired eyes and a manner that suggested he'd seen too much nonsense in his career to suffer any more of it gladly. He dismounted, tied his horse, and approached the house with the weary air of a man performing an unwelcome duty. Mr. Rourke, Mrs. Rourke, he nodded to them both. I expect you know why I'm here. We do, Caleb said. Come in, Marshal. Coffee's hot. They settled at the table while Eleanor served coffee. The marshal's eyes moved constantly, taking in the clean house, the well-stocked shelves, the children lined up quietly but not fearfully. He was assessing, Eleanor realized, comparing what he saw to whatever poison Crowley had poured in his ear. Mr. Crowley filed a complaint, the marshal began. Says your children are in danger. Says Mr. Rourke here threatened him with violence. Says Mrs. Rourke is unfit. He pulled out a notebook. I'm required to investigate, so I need to ask some questions and see the children. Ask anything you want, Eleanor said steadily. We have nothing to hide. The marshal questioned them for an hour. He asked about the children's education, their health, their daily routine. He asked Eleanor about her marriage to Caleb, about the journey west, about her ability to manage a household. He asked Caleb about his past, his income, his plans for the family. Through it all, Eleanor answered with calm honesty, and Caleb backed her up with quiet certainty. The children, when questioned, spoke politely and clearly. Even little Edward, asked if he was happy, said, Yes, sir, we got chickens now, and Caleb lets me help. The marshal's expression grew increasingly skeptical of Crowley's claims. Finally, he closed his notebook. Mrs. Rourke, would you mind if I spoke with your eldest daughter alone? Of course not. Sarah, honey, would you show the marshal around? Sarah led the marshal outside, and Eleanor watched through the window as they walked the property. She saw Sarah pointing to the chicken coop, the vegetable garden already prepared for spring planting, the neat outbuildings. She saw the marshal ask questions, and Sarah answer with her usual grave competence. When they returned, the marshal's decision was clear on his face. Mrs. Rourke, Mr. Rourke, I've seen enough. Those children are healthy, educated, and clearly well loved. This house is clean and well maintained. You've got food stores, proper shelter, and from what I can see, you're managing just fine. He put his notebook away. Mr. Crowley's complaint is without merit. I'll be filing my report saying as much. Eleanor felt her knees go weak with relief. Caleb's hand found hers under the table, squeezing once. However, the marshal continued, there's still the matter of Mr. Crowley's claim that Mr. Rourke threatened him. He drew on me first, Caleb said flatly. I've got witnesses. My wife, my children, and the trail itself shows where it happened. I figured as much. Crowley's not known for his honesty. The marshal stood. But I have to tell you, he's not going to let this go. He's got something planned, and men like that get dangerous when they're cornered. We know, Eleanor said. We're prepared. The marshal studied them both for a long moment. You know, I knew Caleb during the war. He was a good soldier, fair man, even when things got ugly. When I heard he'd bought a wife and 7 children, I wondered if he'd gone soft or crazy. He smiled slightly. Having met you, Mrs. Rourke, I'm thinking he just got smart. You two watch yourselves, and if Crowley makes a move, you send for me. That's what the law is for. After the marshal left, Eleanor and Caleb stood together on the porch, watching him ride away. The children spilled out of the house, no longer needing to be quiet and perfect, their laughter bright in the cold air. We won, Eleanor said, hardly believing it. First round, Caleb cautioned, but it's a good start. Eleanor turned to face him. This man who'd bought her sight unseen, who'd stood beside her against threats and scrutiny, who'd given her and her children not just shelter, but dignity. Caleb, The gunshot cracked across the valley, and Caleb's body jerked. Time seemed to fracture. Eleanor saw Caleb stagger, saw his hand go to his shoulder where blood was already blooming dark against his shirt. She heard Sarah scream and Thomas yelling something she couldn't process. Her body moved before her mind caught up, throwing herself between Caleb and wherever that shot had come from, her arms spread wide as if she could shield him with nothing but flesh and will. "Get the children inside!" Caleb's voice was rough with pain but still commanding. "Now, Eleanor!" Another shot kicked up dirt near the porch. Eleanor grabbed Edward and Catherine, shoving them toward the door where Sarah was already hurting the others. Thomas hesitated, torn between obeying and helping, until Caleb barked, "Go, boy! Protect your sisters!" Eleanor got the last child through the door and turned back to find Caleb on one knee, his rifle somehow in his hands despite the blood streaming from his shoulder. His face was pale but set, his eyes scanning the tree line. "How bad?" she asked, crouching beside him. "Through and through. Missed the bone." He fired once toward the trees, and Eleanor heard a yelp of pain. "Got me from the ridge. Coward shot." "Can you move?" "Have to." Caleb pushed himself up, swaying. Eleanor got under his good shoulder, taking his weight. Together they stumbled toward the house as another shot splintered the doorframe. Inside, Sarah had the children against the far wall, away from windows. Her face was sheet white, but her hands were steady as she held little Edward. Thomas had grabbed Caleb's other rifle from above the fireplace and stood ready, though his hands trembled. "Good thinking," Caleb said to the boy, then immediately to Eleanor. "Upstairs. Can see better from the loft, and the walls are thicker." Eleanor helped him to the stairs while Sarah got the children moving. Caleb was leaving a trail of blood, and Eleanor's mind was screaming that he needed a doctor, needed help, needed more than she could give. But her hands stayed steady as they climbed, as she settled him near the loft window where he could see the approaches to the house. "How many?" she asked. "Saw 3 muzzle flashes. Could be more." Caleb was breathing hard, his face gray. "Crowley doesn't have the spine to shoot me himself. These are hired guns. The children are safer here than anywhere else right now. This house is solid. They'll have to come through the door or windows to get to us, and I'll drop anyone who tries." He checked his rifle's load with practiced hands that barely shook. "Eleanor, I need you to do something. Anything. There's bandages in the chest over there. I need you to pack this wound tight, front and back. Can you do that?" Eleanor's stomach churned, but she nodded. She'd stitched wounds before, had set Thomas's broken arm when he was 6, and they couldn't afford a doctor. This was just more blood, more at stake. Just another thing she had to do to keep her family alive. She gathered supplies while Sarah kept the younger children quiet with whispered stories. Thomas stood at the other window, watching like Caleb had taught him. Eleanor returned to Caleb and started cutting away his bloody shirt. The wound was ragged and ugly, but he was right. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his shoulder without hitting bone or artery. Small mercies. Eleanor packed it with clean cloth, working as gently as she could while Caleb gritted his teeth and watched the tree line. "There," he said quietly. 2 o'clock behind the big pine. Do you see the shadow?" Eleanor looked and saw nothing, but she trusted his eyes. "What are they waiting for?" "For dark, probably, or for me to bleed out." Caleb shifted, testing his shoulder, and hissed at the pain. "Or they're waiting for Crowley to arrive and give the order. This is insane. The marshal just left. He'll know. That's why they're doing it now, before he gets back to town, before he files his report." Caleb's voice was grim. Crowley's making his move. If we're dead, the marshal's report doesn't matter. Eleanor tied off the bandage, her hands red with Caleb's blood. We need to get word to someone. Mrs. Chen, the marshal... Can't. They've got us pinned. Caleb reloaded his rifle. But they can't stay out there forever either. Cold's coming on, and they don't know how many guns we've got in here. Could be just me, could be a dozen men. It's you, me, and a 13-year-old boy with a rifle he doesn't know how to use. Then we make them think otherwise. Caleb raised his voice. Thomas, fire one shot out your window. Aim high, don't try to hit anything. Just show them we've got multiple shooters. Thomas did as instructed, the rifle's crack making everyone jump. Almost immediately, answering fire came from two different positions, bullets punching through the window shutters. Down! Caleb barked. Everyone flattened. When the shooting stopped, Caleb allowed himself a tight smile. Now they're confused. Good. The afternoon dragged into evening in tense silence broken by occasional exchanges of gunfire. The men outside were being cautious, and Caleb was conserving ammunition, only firing when he had a clear target. Eleanor moved between her children, checking on them, keeping them calm despite her own terror. Sarah was remarkable, keeping the little ones quiet with stories and quiet songs. Margaret and Catherine huddled together, holding hands. William had stopped crying and now just looked angry, his small jaw set in an expression that reminded Eleanor painfully of his father. James sat with Thomas, both boys trying to be brave. Mama, Edward whispered during a lull, is Caleb going to die? Eleanor pulled him close, breathing in the little boy's smell of him. No, sweetheart. Caleb's very strong. But he's bleeding. I know, but I fixed it. He's going to be fine. Eleanor made her voice certain, even though fear clawed at her throat. We're all going to be fine. She moved back to Caleb, checking his bandage. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. He was still pale, and she could see pain in every line of his face, though he refused to show it. How are you really? She asked quietly. Been worse. Caleb's eyes never left the window. During the war, took a bayonet through the leg. This is just a scratch compared to that. You're losing blood. I know, but I'll last longer than they will. He glanced at her. You should eat something. Keep your strength up. I'm not hungry. Doesn't matter. You need to eat. His voice softened slightly. The children need to see you eating, need to see you calm. Can you do that? Eleanor understood. The children were watching her, taking their cues from how she reacted. If she fell apart, they would too. So she got out bread and cheese, shared it with the children, made herself chew and swallow despite the knot in her stomach. Full dark fell, and the temperature dropped. Eleanor could see her breath in the loft now. She got blankets for the children, built up the small stove as much as she dared. Outside, nothing moved that she could see, but she felt the presence of the men waiting, watching, plotting. They'll try something tonight, Caleb said, under cover of darkness. Probably try to burn us out or rush the house. We can't fight them all. No, but we can make it cost them more than Crowley's willing to pay. Caleb shifted, and Eleanor saw him wince. Eleanor, I need you to listen carefully. If they get inside, don't. If they get inside, Caleb continued firmly, you take the children and go out through the root cellar. There's a tunnel, leads to the barn. From there you can reach the trees, get to Mrs. Chen's place. I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to. Your job is those children, not me. Eleanor felt anger flare hot through her fear. My job is my family, and that includes you now, whether you like it or not. She met his eyes. We chose this, remember? We stand together. So if you think I'm going to run while you die protecting us, you don't know me at all. Caleb stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect, or something deeper that Eleanor couldn't name in the dim light. You're a hell of a woman, Eleanor Rourke, he said quietly. And you're a stubborn fool, Caleb Rourke. Eleanor checked his bandage again. But you're my stubborn fool, and I'll be damned if I let Crowley take that away. A sound from outside cut off whatever Caleb might have said, the creak of a board, the snap of a twig. Caleb's rifle came up instantly. They're moving, he breathed. Thomas, watch your window. Fire if you see anything. Yes, sir. The next minute stretched like hours. Eleanor could hear sounds now, careful footsteps, whispered voices. The attackers were converging on the house, trying to use the darkness for cover. Then flame blossomed in the night. Someone had lit a torch and was running toward the house, clearly intending to set the walls or roof ablaze. Caleb fired, and the torchbearer went down, but another appeared from a different angle. "Sarah!" Eleanor called. "Get the water buckets ready." Her daughter moved instantly, understanding. If fire reached the roof, they'd need to fight it from inside. Thomas fired his rifle, the recoil nearly knocking him over. Eleanor grabbed the other rifle, moved to another window, and did something she'd never imagined doing, aimed at another human being and pulled the trigger. She missed by a mile, but the shot made the second torchbearer dive for cover. The torch fell in the snow and sputtered out. "Good," Caleb called. "Keep them back." Gunfire erupted from multiple directions now. The attackers had abandoned stealth for force, pouring bullets into the house. Eleanor threw herself over the younger children, shielding them with her body. She heard wood splinter, glass break, and above it all, Caleb's rifle firing methodically, each shot measured and precise despite his wound. Then, impossibly, she heard something else. Hoofbeats. Lots of them. "Hold fire!" a voice bellowed from outside. "Marshal's office! Drop your weapons!" The shooting stopped abruptly. Eleanor raised her head cautiously and saw Caleb's face split into a fierce grin. "That's Grant," he said. He came back. Through the window, Eleanor could see torches now, official torches, carried by men in badges. She counted 8 riders surrounding the property. The men who'd been attacking were caught between the house and the marshal's men, trapped. "You in the house!" Marshal Grant called. "Caleb Rourke, you all right in there?" Caleb moved to the window, careful of his shoulder. "We're alive, Marshal. Got a bullet wound, but I'll live." "Good. Coming in." The marshal and 2 deputies approached the house while the others kept their guns on the surrendering attackers. Eleanor stumbled down the stairs and threw open the door. Marshal Grant stepped inside, took one look at the frightened children and blood-spattered woman, and his face went hard as stone. "Who ordered this?" he asked quietly. "Who do you think?" Caleb had made it down the stairs, leaning heavily on the rail. "Crowley. He's among the men we caught. Soon as I left here, something didn't sit right. Decided to circle back, make sure everything was square." Grant's expression was grim. "Found Crowley and his hired guns staging about a mile from here. Knew right away what was planned." Eleanor felt her legs give out. She sat down hard on the stairs, and suddenly she was shaking, all the terror she'd held at bay rushing through her. Sarah was there immediately, and Thomas, both of them holding her while the younger children pressed close. The marshal's men brought in the captured attackers, 4 rough-looking men, and at the center, Silas Crowley. His face was purple with rage and fear. "This is assault, attempted murder, and arson," Marshal Grant said flatly. "You're going to territorial prison, Crowley, all of you." "You can't prove," Crowley started. "Got 8 witnesses says otherwise, including myself." Grant gestured to his deputies. "Get them out of here." As the men were led away, Crowley locked eyes with Eleanor. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won, but—" "It is over," Eleanor said, finding her voice. She stood, her children around her, and faced the man who'd tried to destroy them. "You lost, not because we were stronger or richer or better connected, but because we stood together, because we chose each other and refused to break." She moved closer, and Crowley actually flinched. "You thought I was weak because I'm fat. Thought Caleb was weak because he's isolated. Thought our family was weak because we're different." She smiled, cold and certain. "You were wrong about all of it." Crowley was dragged away, still sputtering threats. The marshal turned to Eleanor and Caleb with something like respect in his eyes. "You folks did good tonight, held them off against long odds." He looked at Caleb's bandaged shoulder. "You need a doctor." "I'll manage. Eleanor's good with wounds." "I'm sure she is." Grant moved toward the door. "I'll be filing a full report. Crowley's going away for a long time. His land claims will be invalidated, and his water rights will revert to default, which means they stay with you, Caleb. The law may be slow, but it's still the law." After the marshal left, Eleanor and Caleb stood in the wreckage of their home, bullet holes in the walls, broken windows, blood on the floor. The children clustered around them, and Eleanor wrapped her arms around as many as she could reach. Is it really over? Sarah asked, her voice small. It's really over, Caleb said. He swayed slightly, and Eleanor moved to support him. But we need to clean up this mess. Tomorrow, Eleanor said firmly. Tonight you're going to let me properly dress that wound, and then you're going to rest. Yes, ma'am. Caleb's voice was weak, but laced with something that might have been amusement. They got the children settled first, all of them in one pile again, needing the comfort of closeness after the terror. Then Eleanor tended to Caleb properly, boiling water, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made him hiss, stitching it closed with the same steady hands that had mended 1,000 torn garments. You're good at this, Caleb said, watching her work. I've had practice. Eleanor tied off the last stitch. My husband, my first husband, worked the docks. Injuries were common. I learned to stitch because we couldn't afford doctors. He was lucky to have you. I was lucky to have him. He was a good man. Eleanor met Caleb's eyes. You're a good man, too. Different, but good. I'm a killer, Eleanor. You saw that tonight. I shot men without hesitation. You protected your family. That's not the same thing. Eleanor began wrapping clean bandages. You gave me and my children a home when no one else would. You stood against Crowley when you could have walked away. You were shot protecting us. Don't tell me you're not good. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, carefully, he reached up with his good hand and touched her face. His palm was warm and calloused, and Eleanor found herself leaning into it. When I saw you on that platform, he said quietly, I saw a woman who'd been beaten down by life but hadn't broken. I saw strength that had nothing to do with size or beauty or any of the things people usually value. I saw someone worth choosing. I wasn't the only one who needed choosing, Eleanor said. You were alone up here, convinced you deserved to be, punishing yourself for things that weren't your fault. Maybe we both needed choosing. Eleanor covered his hand with hers. Maybe we did. The moment stretched between them, weighted with possibility and fear and hope all tangled together. Then Caleb's eyes closed, exhaustion and blood loss finally claiming him. Rest, Eleanor whispered, easing him down onto his bedroll. I'll watch over things. She sat by the fire through the night, listening to Caleb's breathing, to her children's soft snores from the loft. The house was damaged but standing. Her family was frightened but safe. They'd faced violence and won, not through greater force, but through refusing to break. As dawn began to paint the windows gray, Eleanor heard Caleb stir. You didn't sleep, he said, his voice rough. Someone had to keep watch. Eleanor, he struggled to sit up. You can't take care of everyone all the time. Watch me. She poured him water, held the cup while he drank. Besides, you'd have done the same. That's different. Why? Because you're the man? Because you're supposed to be strong and I'm supposed to be weak? Eleanor set the cup down. We're past that now, Caleb. We're partners. We stand together or not at all. Caleb studied her face in the growing light. Partners, he repeated slowly. I like the sound of that. Good, because you're stuck with me now. Eleanor stood, stretching her stiff back. And you're stuck with 7 children who are going to wake up hungry and scared and needing reassurance that everything's all right. Is everything all right? Eleanor looked around their bullet-riddled house, at the man she'd married bleeding on the floor, at the uncertain future stretching before them. Then she looked at the loft where her children slept safe, at the mountains beyond the windows that were slowly becoming familiar, at this strange, rough, honest man who'd chosen her when no one else would. Yes, she said. I think it is. The children woke to find their mother cooking breakfast as if nothing had happened, though her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. Eleanor moved through the familiar motions, stoking the fire, mixing batter for Johnny cakes, slicing salt pork, while Caleb sat at the table, pale but upright, his shoulder bandaged and his rifle within reach. Sarah came down first, taking in the bullet holes in the walls, the broken windows covered with blankets. Mama? Good morning, sweetheart. Would you help me set the table? Sarah moved to obey, but her eyes kept darting to the damage, to Caleb's bandaged shoulder, to her mother's too bright smile. The other children followed, growing quiet as they saw what the night had left behind. It was little Edward who finally broke the silence. He walked straight to Caleb and climbed into his lap, careful of the injured shoulder. "You saved us," he said simply. Caleb's good arm came around the boy. "We saved each other. Your mama kept everyone calm. Your brothers and sisters were brave. We all did our part." "Like a family," Edward said. "Exactly like a family." Caleb's eyes found Eleanor's across the room, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of what they'd become through fire and fear. They ate breakfast together, and Eleanor watched her children begin to relax. They were resilient, she thought with fierce pride. They'd lived through poverty and loss, through desperate gambles and violence, and they were still here, still whole, damaged maybe, like the house around them, but standing. After breakfast, Eleanor surveyed the repairs needed. The windows could be boarded until they got proper glass. The bullet holes could be patched. The blood could be scrubbed away. It was just work, and Eleanor had never been afraid of work. "I'll help," Caleb said, trying to stand. "You'll sit," Eleanor countered firmly. "That wound needs at least a week before you're doing heavy work." "Eleanor, don't argue with Mama when she's using that voice," Thomas advised with the ghost of a smile. "You'll lose." Caleb settled back with a grunt that might have been amusement. "Seems I'm outnumbered." "Seems you are," Eleanor agreed. "Thomas, James, William, you're with me. Sarah, keep an eye on Caleb and the little ones. If his bandage starts bleeding through, you call me immediately." They worked through the morning, the boys following Eleanor's directions as they boarded windows and began patching walls. It was hard work, made harder by the cold and the fear that still lingered in Eleanor's chest. But it was also satisfying, reclaiming their home from the violence that had tried to destroy it. Mrs. Chen arrived mid-morning with her husband, both of them bringing supplies and concern. Mrs. Chen took one look at the damage and immediately rolled up her sleeves. "This is bad," she said bluntly, "but not too bad. We fix, Mr. Chen approached Caleb, examining his shoulder with practiced hands. "The stitching is good. Your wife has skill." "My wife has a lot of skills people don't see," Caleb said, watching Eleanor direct the repair work with quiet competence. "People see what they want to see," Mr. Chen agreed, "but smart people see what is actually there." He smiled slightly. "You are smart people, I think." Over the next few days, neighbors arrived, the Johnsons, the Parkers, even old Henderson, who claimed he just wanted to see if the rumors were true. They brought lumber and glass, food and helping hands. They brought something else, too. Acceptance. These rough frontier families looked at Eleanor and Caleb and their makeshift clan and saw not something strange or wrong, but something worth defending. "Heard what happened," Johnson said, hammering boards with Thomas's help. "Heard how you stood them off. That took courage." "Took desperation," Eleanor corrected. "Sometimes those are the same thing." Johnson nodded toward Caleb. "Your husband's a good man. Quiet, keeps to himself, but good. We're glad he's got family now." "So am I," Eleanor said, and realized she meant it completely. The house came together slowly but surely. Windows were repaired, walls patched and replastered. Eleanor scrubbed blood from the floorboards until her hands were raw, erasing the physical evidence even as the memories stayed sharp. But memories could be lived with. Memories proved you'd survived. Caleb healed faster than Eleanor expected, though she caught him wincing when he thought no one was looking. He tried to do too much too soon, and she had to scold him back to rest more than once. "You're worse than the children," she told him one afternoon, finding him trying to chop wood one-handed. "I'm fine." "You're stubborn." Eleanor took the axe from him. "And you're going to tear your stitches and bleed all over my clean bandages." "Your bandages? I'm the one who has to change them when you're foolish enough to damage yourself further. So yes, my bandages." Eleanor pointed to the house. "Inside. Now." Caleb went, but Eleanor caught the small smile on his face. They were finding their rhythm, she and this mountain man, learning when to push and when to yield, when to speak, and when silence said enough. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the attack, Eleanor was putting the children to bed when Sarah asked the question they'd all been thinking. "Mama, are we safe now? Really safe?" Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, brushing hair from her daughter's face. As safe as anyone can be in this world, sweetheart. Crowley's in prison. The marshal said he'll be there for years. His land claims are void, and we have legal title to everything here. But what if someone else comes? What if... Then we'll face it together, the way we face this. Eleanor gathered her daughter close. Sarah, I can't promise you nothing bad will ever happen again. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise you won't face it alone. You have me and Caleb and your brothers and sisters. We're a family now, a real one. Do you love him? Sarah whispered. Caleb? Eleanor was quiet, considering the question honestly. Did she love Caleb Rourke? She barely knew him, really, just a few weeks of acquaintance, most of it spent in crisis. But she knew he was honorable. She knew he was brave. She knew he saw her as no one else had, valued her for things beyond appearance or convenience. I respect him, Eleanor said carefully. I trust him. I'm grateful to him. Love takes time, Sarah. But I think maybe it's starting, like seeds planted in winter ground, waiting for spring. Sarah nodded, satisfied with this answer in the way only children could be. I think he loves you too, the way he looks at you when you're not watching. After the children slept, Eleanor went downstairs to find Caleb by the fire, reading his worn copy of Robinson Crusoe. He looked up as she approached. Children settled? Finally, Edward wanted 3 more stories. Eleanor sat across from him, taking up her mending. They'd fallen into this pattern, quiet evenings by the fire, working on separate tasks but together nonetheless. Been thinking, Caleb said after a while. About spring. What about it? We should expand the garden. With 9 mouths to feed, we'll need more vegetables. And I want to add on to the house. Another room, maybe 2. Give the children proper space. Eleanor's hands stilled on her mending. He was talking about the future. Not just surviving the winter, but building something that would last. That would be good, she said quietly. Also been thinking about schooling. Sarah's smart, and Thomas too. They should have more than just reading and writing. Mr. Chen said he'd be willing to teach them mathematics and some science. His wife could teach them Chinese if they're interested. You've thought a lot about this. Caleb set down his book. I've thought about a lot of things lately, Eleanor. About what I want this place to be. What I want this family to be. And what do you want? I want it to be real. He leaned forward, his ice-chip eyes intense. Started as a business arrangement, practical exchange. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. At least for me. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. For me too. I know I'm not easy to live with. I know I'm rough and I'm scarred and I'm more comfortable with silence than conversation. I know I can't give you fancy things or an easy life. I don't want fancy things or an easy life, Caleb. I want honesty. I want partnership. I want someone who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't flinch away. Eleanor set down her mending. You gave me that on a frozen platform when you looked past everything everyone else saw and chose me anyway. I chose well. So did I. Eleanor stood, moved closer to him. We both chose well. Caleb reached up with his good hand and Eleanor took it, letting him draw her down to sit beside him. This close, she could see the silver in his hair, the fine lines around his eyes, the scars that mapped a life lived hard. I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. Didn't plan to. Didn't think I could anymore. But there it is. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I'm falling in love with you too. It terrifies me. Why? Because I lost one husband already. Lost him and had to keep going because the children needed me. I don't know if I could survive losing you too. Then we'll have to make sure I don't get lost. Caleb's thumb traced patterns on her palm. We'll be careful. We'll be smart. We'll watch each other's backs the way we did during the attack. Partners, Eleanor said, echoing their earlier conversation. Partners, Caleb agreed. In all things. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Eleanor didn't want to pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. Not to a place, but to a person. The kiss was gentle and careful, respectful of the newness between them, but underneath ran a current of something deeper, something that promised more when they were ready. When they pulled apart, Caleb touched his forehead to hers. We'll take it slow, he said. No rush. We've got time. Time, Eleanor repeated, and the word felt like a gift. Time to build trust. Time to learn each other. Time to let love grow from the seeds of respect and partnership into something that could weather any storm. Spring came to the mountains gradually, the snow retreating inch by stubborn inch. Eleanor watched the world transform from white to brown to green, and she marveled at the resilience of it. How life pushed up through frozen ground, how everything that had seemed dead revealed itself to have been only sleeping. She felt like she was waking too, after years of just surviving. The children bloomed in the mountain air, growing strong and confident. Thomas and James were becoming young men under Caleb's patient teaching, learning to read the land and handle stock and fix what broke. Sarah had taken to Mrs. Chen like a second mother, learning to cook Chinese dishes and speak halting Mandarin. Even the little ones were thriving, their cheeks filling out, their laughter coming easier. And Eleanor herself was changing. The constant fear that had lived in her chest for so long was fading, replaced by something she barely recognized: contentment. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the foundation on which happiness could be built. One morning in early May, she woke to find Caleb already up and working in the garden. His shoulder had healed cleanly, leaving only a puckered scar he wore with the same matter-of-fact acceptance he wore all his marks. She watched him from the window, this man who'd become her husband in truth as well as law, and felt warmth spread through her chest. They'd taken it slow, as promised. Careful kisses by the fire, hands held during evening walks, quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. And then, one evening, 3 weeks past, Eleanor had climbed down from the loft and slipped into Caleb's bed, and he'd welcomed her with gentle hands and whispered words, and they'd become husband and wife in every sense. It wasn't the passionate romance of storybooks. It was better. It was real. Built on mutual respect and hard-won trust, on seeing each other's flaws and choosing each other anyway. Eleanor went outside to join him in the garden. "You're up early." "Wanted to get the beans planted before it gets hot." Caleb straightened, wiping dirt from his hands. "Sleep well?" "Very well." Eleanor moved to help him, kneeling in the soft earth. They worked in companionable silence for a while, hands moving in the rhythm they'd developed over months of shared labor. "Been meaning to talk to you about something," Caleb said eventually. Eleanor's hands paused. His tone was serious. "What is it?" "Marshall came by yesterday while you were at the Chens. Said Crowley's trial is set for next month. They want us to testify." "Both of us?" "Both of us. And possibly the children, if the prosecutor thinks it'll help." Caleb dusted soil from a seed packet. "Means going to town for a few days. Being in court, facing Crowley again." Eleanor considered this. The thought of seeing Crowley made her stomach tight, but she'd faced worse than a man in chains. "We'll go. We'll tell the truth. It's what we've always done." "You're not worried?" "Terrified," Eleanor admitted. "But I learned something these past months. Fear doesn't have to stop you. Sometimes you just carry it with you and do what needs doing anyway." Caleb's expression softened. "You're the bravest person I know, Eleanor Rourke." "I learned from the best." She leaned over and kissed him, quick and sweet, tasting earth and coffee and home. The trip to town came too quickly and not quick enough. Eleanor prepared the children carefully, making sure they understood what would happen, why it mattered. Sarah and Thomas would testify about what they'd seen. The younger ones would stay with Mrs. Chen, spared the ordeal. Covenant Creek looked different to Eleanor now. The platform where she'd stood unwanted was just weathered wood. The people who stared were just people. Some kind, some cruel, none of them important enough to dim her sense of self. She walked through town with her head high, Caleb beside her, and her children around her. And if people whispered, well, let them. The trial was held in the territorial courthouse, a solid building that smelled of wood polish and old paper. Eleanor sat in the witness box and told her story: the auction, the journey, Crowley's threats, the attack. She spoke clearly and without embellishment, letting the facts stand for themselves. Crowley's lawyer tried to shake her testimony, suggesting she'd misunderstood, that her weight affected her perception, that a woman of her background couldn't be trusted. Eleanor met each insinuation with calm certainty. and she watched the jury's faces shift from skepticism to sympathy to anger on her behalf. When Caleb testified, he was equally direct, his account matching Eleanor's in every detail. Thomas spoke briefly but powerfully about watching his mother stand between them and danger. Sarah described Crowley's men with the torch, her voice shaking but clear. The prosecutor's closing argument was simple. "This man," he said, pointing at Crowley, "tried to murder a family because he wanted their land and water. He hired killers. He attacked at night. He showed no mercy to women or children. The evidence is clear, the witnesses are credible, and justice demands conviction." The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Crowley was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison, his land and assets seized to pay restitution. As the marshal led him away, he turned to Eleanor one last time. "You think you've won," he spat, "but you're still just a fat woman nobody wanted. I'll always be the woman who beat you," Eleanor interrupted calmly. "The woman who stood when you tried to break her. The woman who built a family and a home and a life despite everything you tried to take." She smiled, cold and certain. "And you'll always be the man who lost to her. Sleep well with that, Mr. Crowley." She turned away before he could respond, taking Caleb's offered arm and walking out of the courthouse into the spring sunshine. Outside, Marshal Grant was waiting. Mr. Rourke wanted to congratulate you on the verdict." "Thank you, Marshal," Eleanor said, "for everything. If you hadn't come back that night, just doing my job. Though I admit I've rarely seen people face down that kind of danger with such courage." He tipped his hat. "You're both credit to this territory. Your children, too." As they walked back toward the hotel where they were staying, Eleanor noticed people watching them, but the quality of the attention had changed. There was respect in those looks now, and curiosity, and in some cases, admiration. The woman nobody wanted had become the woman who'd stood down a killer and won in court. The mountain recluse had become the family man who'd protected his own against impossible odds. Eleanor found she didn't care much either way. The opinions of strangers had never mattered less. That evening, they had dinner at the hotel restaurant, a rare treat, and one Eleanor insisted on. They sat around a large table, the whole family together, and Eleanor looked at each face in turn. Thomas, growing into a fine young man who'd learned that strength came in many forms. James, quieter but no less capable, with his father's steady hands. William, still learning but eager and brave. Sarah, becoming a woman of grace and competence. Margaret and Catherine, learning that being small didn't mean being helpless. And Edward, who would grow up knowing that family meant standing together. And Caleb, her husband, her partner, her unexpected gift. He caught her looking and raised his coffee cup in a small salute. Eleanor raised hers in return. "To family," Caleb said quietly. "To family," they all echoed. The journey back to the homestead took 2 days, and Eleanor spent them looking at the landscape with new eyes. This was home now, these mountains, this valley, this rough country that demanded everything and gave back just enough. She belonged here. They all did. When the house came into view, nestled in its valley with smoke rising from the chimney where Mrs. Chen had kept the fire, Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. Mrs. Chen had also planted flowers by the door, bright spots of color against the dark logs. "She's been busy," Caleb observed with amusement. "She's a good friend." "We've been blessed with good friends." Caleb helped Eleanor down from the wagon. "Good neighbors, good land, good family. Good life," Eleanor added. They unloaded the wagon together, the children running ahead to greet Mrs. Chen and reclaim their space. Eleanor and Caleb worked in the easy silence they'd perfected, and when the last box was inside, they stood together on the porch, looking out at their valley. "You ever regret it?" Eleanor asked. "That day in Covenant Creek? Taking on a fat widow with 7 children?" Caleb pulled her close with one arm. "Every day," he said, and Eleanor's heart dropped until she heard the smile in his voice. "Every day I think about how close I came to walking away. How close I came to missing out on the best thing that ever happened to me. I wasn't the best thing. You were. You are." Caleb turned her to face him. "You and those children gave me back my life, Eleanor. Gave me purpose beyond just surviving. Taught me that family isn't about blood or perfection. It's about standing together when things get hard. We did get through some hard things. And we'll get through whatever comes next. Caleb kissed her forehead. Together. Together, Eleanor agreed. Summer came in full force, and the homestead bustled with life and work. They expanded the garden as planned, and Caleb started building the addition to the house. The neighbors helped with the heavy work, and Eleanor fed them all, learning to cook for crowds with the same competence she brought to everything else. The children thrived in ways Eleanor had never dared dream. Thomas talked about wanting to study law someday, inspired by the trial. Sarah had a gift for languages and spent hours with Mrs. Chen. The younger ones were growing strong and confident, learning that they could be both loved and useful. And Eleanor herself transformed in ways that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with her spirit. She stood straighter now, spoke louder, took up the space she deserved. She learned to ride a horse, to shoot a rifle, to read the weather in the clouds. She became fluent in the language of this land, learning when to plant and when to harvest, how to preserve food and how to stretch supplies, when to push and when to rest. She became, in short, exactly who she'd always been beneath the weight of other people's expectations. Strong, capable, worthy of respect and love. One evening in late August, as the sun painted the mountains gold and the children played in the yard, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch together. His arm was around her shoulders, her head rested on his chest, and between them was the kind of peace that comes only from having fought for something and won. "Happy?" Caleb asked quietly. Eleanor considered the question honestly. Was she happy? She was still heavy, still struggling with tasks that came easily to smaller women. Money was tight, and the work was endless. Winter would come again, and with it new challenges. The world still had people who judged her, who looked at her size and made assumptions about her worth. But she had a home. She had children who were safe and loved. She had neighbors who respected her, and a husband who cherished her. She had proved to herself and the world that she was more than anyone had believed possible. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I'm happy." "Good." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "You deserve to be. So do you." "I know." His voice was warm with contentment. "Took me a while to believe it, but I know now." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, Eleanor could hear Sarah reading to the younger children, her voice carrying through the open windows. Thomas and James were finishing evening chores, their good-natured bickering of familiar music. This was what Eleanor had gambled everything for, not just survival, but belonging, not just shelter, but home. Not just a marriage contract, but love earned through shared struggle and mutual respect. She'd stood on that frozen platform, certain of only one thing, that doing nothing meant losing everything. So she'd chosen to act, to risk, to reach for the desperate hope of something better. And somehow, impossibly, that hope had borne fruit. Eleanor Hayes had been the woman nobody wanted. Eleanor Rourke was the woman who'd built a family from strangers, who'd defended her home against violence, who'd stood in court and spoken truth, who'd learned to see herself through eyes that valued substance over appearance. She was the woman who discovered that she'd never been too much. The world had simply been too small to hold her. "Mama," Edward called from the yard, "come see, the fireflies are out." Eleanor smiled and stood, pulling Caleb with her. Together they joined their children in the gathering dusk, chasing fireflies and laughing, while above them the mountains stood eternal and the stars wheeled in their ancient dance. And Eleanor knew, with the certainty of hard-won wisdom, that this was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The woman nobody wanted had found the family everybody needs, not perfect, not easy, but real and true, and worth every risk, every fear, every desperate leap of faith. She had found home, and home had found her. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered.